Welcome to the Deep Dive, the show where we embark on an intellectual adventure, really sifting through mountains of information to unearth the most critical insights. Think of us as your expert guides, navigating complex landscapes to give you, well, the shortcut to being truly well-informed. Today, our journey takes us to a fascinating and, frankly, somewhat paradoxical economic phenomenon that's just dominating conversations in China: involution. How can an economy that boasts, immense strength, these incredibly intricate supply chains and fierce global competitiveness simultaneously find itself kind of ensnared in this relentless, seemingly self-destructive cycle? It's a riddle that has profound implications and is one we're really eager to unravel for you today.
It's an absolutely crucial question, and its echoes resonate far beyond China's borders, touching upon, well, universal principles of competition and value creation. Our mission today is to embark on a real deep dive into this captivating concept of involution, or Niwan, as it's known in Chinese. It's transformed from, a somewhat obscure academic term into a veritable national phenomenon, a phrase whispered and debated everywhere, from the highest echelons of policymaking right down to the most casual conversations among everyday citizens. We've meticulously combed through, well, a treasure trove of articles, research papers, expert analyses, including some incredibly insightful discussions we found, to truly grasp its core causes, scrutinize the government's valiant attempts to address it, and, maybe most importantly, illuminate what this means for you. Whether you're navigating global markets, making pivotal career choices, or simply striving to make sense of the rapidly shifting world around us, understanding involution is, well, it's key.
Okay, let's unpack this concept then, Naywan. While it feels incredibly contemporary in the Chinese context, it just exploded onto the scene around 2020, right? Even recognized as one of the top 10 buzzwords that year. But its intellectual origins actually stretch back much further.
That's right. We're talking 1963, believe it or not. The American anthropologist Clifford Geertz first coined the term. He used it to describe a specific, almost peculiar phenomenon he observed in Javanese agricultural economies. His fieldwork revealed that farmers were pouring more and more labor into cultivating their rice paddies, but that increased input just wasn't yielding a proportionate increase in output. The effort was intensifying, sure, but the overall harvest, the pie, if you will, it remained stubbornly stagnant.
So more work, same, or maybe even less reward. That's the foundational insight, isn't it?
Exactly. And it's essential for understanding the economic definition we're applying today. Involution occurs when marginal returns not only diminish but plummet to zero, or even become negative. Just pause for a moment and truly consider that implication. You're dedicating more effort, more precious resources, more invaluable time, yet you're either getting the exact same outcome or less, or, and this is the really destructive part, you're actively destroying value in the process.
Wow, that's a stark contrast to what we normally think of as economic activity. Even in a slowdown, usually you still get something back, even if it's less than before.
Precisely. This stands in stark opposition to what we typically observe in healthy economic systems, even with diminishing but still positive returns, or obviously the exponential curves of true growth. And the Chinese economy, with its vast, incredibly complete supply chains and, let's be honest, frequently significant overcapacity across numerous sectors, it inadvertently creates an almost perfectly fertile ground for this particularly destructive brand of competition to take root and, well, flourish.
Okay, so let's contrast involution with evolution. The words themselves sound similar, but that prefix in versus e seems critical. You mentioned outward evolution for evolution.
Exactly. Evolution is widely perceived as an outward evolution, zhangwa yanghua, signifying development, expansion, progress towards a greater scale or complexity. It's moving outwards, breaking new ground. But involution, with that in prefix, implies inward evolution, zhangwa yanghua. And that inwardness is the real crux of the problem.
What does that inwardness actually mean for a system? How does it become destructive?
That inward evolution is precisely where the destructive mechanism lies. It means a system develops increasingly intricate, repetitive internal details, maybe adding layers of complexity, but without actually expanding its overall external scale or increasing its total value, or really breaking any new ground. Imagine a complex knot that just tightens relentlessly around itself. It becomes more intricate, sure, but ultimately it's choking its own growth.
So it's not just stagnation, it's actively tying itself up.
Exactly. It's not mere stagnation. It's a system trapped within a self-reinforcing, destructive loop that inevitably leads towards a state of self-cannibalization or even outright self-destruction. Contrast this with dynamic equilibrium, right, where returns might be diminishing, but they stay positive, allowing for sustainable operations. Or true growth, characterized by increasing returns, that powerful flywheel effect, where each unit of effort generates disproportionately more value. Involution, characterized by those negative marginal returns, represents a far more extreme and devastating state than a typical economic slowdown or a normal business cycle. It's a system truly stuck, basically eating itself from within.
That distinction is truly stark. And the sources we looked at really hammer home how this single word, involution, has just completely transcended academic circles in China. It's become, as they say, a national vocabulary, a prevailing era's emotion. Its ubiquitous adoption on platforms like Zhihu, that's sort of like China's Quora, right? It isn't just a linguistic trend.
No, it signals something profoundly deeper. It's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way, where the sheer popularity and resonance of a word acts as a kind of barometer, reflecting a deep-seated societal sentiment or an undeniable underlying reality that people collectively perceive and are trying to articulate.
So it's moved way beyond being just a buzzword.
Oh, absolutely. It's emerged as an undeniable elephant in the room, as our sources vividly describe it, a phenomenon so pervasive and impactful that literally no one, whether you're talking about people in the halls of power or just the common people, can genuinely deny its existence or its widespread impact. The fact that even top policymakers are now openly acknowledging it, talking about it, strategizing against it, that underscores a significant shift in understanding and approach at the highest levels. This widespread recognition makes it abundantly clear that involution isn't some peripheral concern. It's a deeply felt systemic issue that demands urgent attention and, well, action.
Okay, so we've mapped out what involution is. Now let's dive into the practical mechanics. What are these involution machines, as the sources call them? These specific mechanisms and structures operating in plain sight, making this whole thing so pervasive and accelerating its destructive path. Let's start with something almost everyone, everywhere, has experienced. E-commerce platforms and those infamous, relentless price wars.
Right. At its fundamental core, the mechanism is, well, it's deceptively simple, but incredibly potent. Many e-commerce platforms, especially in the hyper-competitive Chinese market, are basically engineered with ranking systems that heavily prioritize the lowest price. This creates an almost irresistible gravitational pull for sellers. If you want your product to get seen, to stand a chance, you are perpetually compelled to undercut your competitors, drive those prices ever lower.
And China's unique context makes this even more potent, doesn't it? With those complete supply chains and that baseline overcapacity.
Exactly. That combination means this platform design creates a powerful, self-sustaining downward spiral. Competition very quickly becomes just a race to the bottom. There's always someone who can make it cheaper because the capacity is there.
We've seen really vivid examples of this, haven't we? I remember reading about the past food delivery wars in China. Companies were practically offering 0 yuan purchases because the subsidies were so intense.
Absolutely surreal, wasn't it? Consumers, for a short time, got services for next to nothing. Seemed great on the surface. But in the long run, that unsustainable model just systematically destroyed the ecosystem for countless small merchants, small restaurants. It didn't just offer low prices, it fundamentally reset consumer expectations. Everyone started expecting things to be practically free.
New destructive baseline for entire industries.
And that new, dangerously low expectation becomes a virtual trap for every industry that falls into it. It forces companies to slash their margins to the absolute bone, operating on razor-thin profits or, often at a significant loss, just to maintain visibility on the platform, just to survive another day. It transforms the market into this desperate race, a relentless battle where even the most efficient, the most innovative players can find themselves just consumed by the need to match the lowest price. It stifles any real innovation or value creation because all energy goes into cost cutting.
Okay, another really fascinating involution machine highlighted in our sources is the unique model of real estate agents in China. It's different from how it works in many other places, right?
Very different. Unlike many countries where agents typically represent only one side, either the buyer or the seller, Chinese real estate agents predominantly function as matchmakers or guohexijiao. They're dual-sided agents sitting right in the middle, facilitating the deal for both parties.
And this dual-sided role gives them
What?
more influence on the price?
An extraordinary and often destabilizing influence on market acceleration. Think about a bull market. These agents, acting as crucial information hubs and sort of trusted intermediaries, they can very adeptly leverage the anxiety of buyers, subtly or maybe not so subtly, pushing them to bid higher and higher. This dynamic accelerates price increases, often at an unnatural pace.
Okay, and then in a downturn.
Conversely, in a bear market, their tactics flip. They specifically target the most anxious sellers, the ones most desperate to get out, exerting considerable pressure on them to drastically drop their prices. This then accelerates the market's decline, creating that self-reinforcing downward spiral we keep talking about.
So they amplify the swings, both up and down.
Precisely. The profound consequence of this mechanism, especially when combined with the fact that agents effectively control the flow of critical market information for many buyers and sellers, is an intensification of price adjustments and a dramatic amplification of market volatility. We saw this starkly play out with reports of average monthly price drops in major cities like Beijing and Shanghai, where agents were powerfully incentivized to pressure the weakest sellers to lower prices further and further just to make any transaction happen. This relentless downward pressure can push entire sectors, like real estate, towards a perilous point of collapse, making government intervention not just desirable, but almost inevitable to prevent systemic damage.
It really highlights how seemingly neutral market structures can have these profound accelerating effects, pushing whole sectors into that destructive inward spiral.
It's a powerful illustration, absolutely.
And it's not just platform design or unique market structures like real estate agency. Our sources also point to a broader, more pervasive problem: homogenized competition and a chronic lack of real differentiation across many Chinese industries. The banking sector came up as a classic example.
Oh, definitely. In the banking industry, any genuinely new or innovative financial product is almost instantly copied by a swarm of competitors. It leads to incredibly rapid product homogenization. Everyone offers basically the same thing. Now, back in the high-growth era, say before maybe 2019, this was largely manageable. The market itself was expanding at such a dizzying pace that, as some insiders joked, banks were literally earning money so easily it felt embarrassing.
Right, a rising tide lifts all boats, even if the boats look identical.
Pretty much. Even with largely undifferentiated products, there was simply enough demand for virtually everyone to thrive, to get their slice of that ever-growing pie. But the moment that demand started to shrink or growth began to plateau, this pervasive homogeneity immediately forced brutal, zero-sum price competition. It became that bayonet-to-bayonet state, as one source put it, a real fight to the death over dwindling margins.
And industries without strong differentiation or maybe high barriers to entry, they just get trapped.
They become inextricably trapped in a continuous race to the bottom. Because in that environment, new entrants can always leverage some form of low-cost advantage. Maybe it's cheap government-backed loans, maybe incredibly favorable local policies to quickly capture market share, perpetuating the cycle and continuously squeezing margins for absolutely everyone.
Which brings us to a really critical and almost counterintuitive paradox you mentioned.
Right.
Individual rationality leading to collective pain. How does that work? How can smart companies rationally choose to participate in this?
It's a tough one to wrap your head around. But even the most powerful individual actors, acting entirely rationally from their own perspective, can inadvertently initiate or just intensely participate in this destructive involutionary process. Take the ongoing, absolutely brutal automotive price wars, for instance.
Right. Who starts those? Is it always the biggest players?
It seems the first mover in these aggressive price wars is almost invariably the lowest cost producer. This is typically a company that's achieved extreme operational efficiency. Maybe they boast deeply integrated or closed supply chains like Tesla did in its early days, or certain hyper-efficient Chinese manufacturers today. They possess the unique ability to drastically lower prices, absorb significant short-term losses, with the explicit, calculated aim of strategically eliminating their higher-cost competitors. Clear the field.
And there's a manufacturing logic behind that, isn't there? Something about production scale.
Absolutely. This strategy brilliantly leverages principles like Wright's law in manufacturing. The basic idea is that with every doubling of cumulative output, the per-unit cost of production can fall by a significant chunk, say 10–20%. This fundamental principle creates an enormous incentive for companies to pursue massive scale, even if it means initially operating at razor-thin margins. The underlying bet is that as you produce more and more, your costs will keep falling, eventually leading to profitability, but often only after you've driven a lot of the competition out of business.
So the paradox is stark. Each company acts rationally for its own survival or market share, but the collective outcome for the whole industry can be utterly devastating.
Utterly. It often leads to a situation where the entire ecosystem is damaged, as our sources highlight. It gets so bad that government intervention becomes not just a possibility, but an almost inevitable necessity to salvage whatever is left. It's a textbook example of the prisoner's dilemma, really, just played out on an immense industrial scale. Individual optimization leads to collective, suboptimal outcomes. Basically, everyone loses in the long run.
And what's really striking in the Chinese context, based on the sources, is the sheer resilience or maybe stubbornness of companies caught in this trap, especially those with huge fixed investments like steel mills or big factories. They just keep going.
They do. They'll continue to produce, often even at incredibly, almost unbelievably low profits. One source chillingly mentioned earning a mere 1 cent per ton of steel at one point, just to maintain some semblance of cash flow and service their colossal debts.
Yep.
Because the alternative, right, just stopping production, that often spells immediate and irrevocable collapse. So staying at the table, enduring the pain of this game, is frequently perceived as the only viable rational choice for their very survival, even if it means operating right on the precipice, bleeding cash slowly.
Okay, so given this incredibly challenging, often destructive environment, what is the government actually doing to try and get a handle on this?
Yeah.
To push back against involution, our sources pointed to a really significant policy shift recently.
Yes, that meeting of the Central Financial and Economic Affairs Commission on July 1st, 2024, it explicitly identified and targeted low-price disorderly competition and emphasized the need for an orderly exit of backward production capacity.
And the significance is where this came from, the top level.
Exactly. Its provenance, coming directly from the highest decision-making body in China, signals that this is now firmly in the implementation stage, the Shishijiyuan, rather than just being, a directional policy or another rhetorical call to action. It unmistakably indicates that the government views this as an absolutely critical, systemic issue demanding direct and decisive intervention.
But didn't they say something similar before? I think you mentioned a year earlier.
That's right. Context is important here. Similar calls and pronouncements were made about a year prior at the July 2023 Politburo meeting. Yet remarkably little seemed to change on the ground, which really powerfully underscores the immense complexity and the formidable challenges inherent in actually implementing such far-reaching policies effectively. It's one thing to state the goal, quite another to make it happen.
So how does this current anti-involution strategy compare to the past efforts, like the big supply-side reforms back in the 2010s? Are they targeting the same things?
No, and that's a crucial difference. There's a major distinction in the nature of the target industries. The supply-side reforms of the 2010s primarily set their sights on what were genuinely backward and chronically oversaturated industries. Think upstream sectors like steel and coal. These industries were unequivocally characterized by significant environmental pollution, outdated technology, clear inefficiencies. It made swift, decisive action both politically easier and economically more palatable. The mandate was clear. Cut out the truly outdated stuff.
Okay, but the current effort is different. It's focusing more downstream.
Right. The current anti-involution efforts, based on our sources, are concentrating on a very different segment, mid to downstream industries. And here's the real paradox. These often aren't backward at all. In fact, they are frequently global survivors. We're talking about hyper-efficient, incredibly competitive sectors like solar panels, lithium batteries, new energy vehicles. These are industries where China isn't just a player, it's often the global leader.
Which creates a massive dilemma. Right. Yeah. How do you decide who exits when they're all world-class?
It's an extraordinarily difficult dilemma for policymakers. It is exponentially harder to determine who exits the market when the companies aren't genuinely inefficient or backward, but are, quite the contrary, world-class in their efficiency and production capabilities. The social cost of forcing these highly competitive companies to scale back or exit, particularly in terms of potential job losses, the impact on local GDP, it becomes a truly substantial and politically very sensitive burden. This isn't about cutting dead weight. It's potentially about pruning what are arguably some of the most successful branches of the economy.
The solar panel industry, Guangfu, came up again and again as the quintessential example of this paradox. Globally dominant, incredibly efficient, yet a poster child for involution. How did that happen?
It's a really multifaceted and complex story. Firstly, you had central government policies and generous financial subsidies in the earlier phases that made entering solar manufacturing extremely attractive, almost irresistible for many companies. Then, crucially, you had local governments, Often operating under immense pressure to boost local GDP figures, create jobs, they eagerly jumped into the fray. They offered a whole array of incentives: prime land at rock-bottom prices, additional financial support, and often these off-balance sheet benefits.
Could you just quickly clarify what off-balance sheet benefits might mean for someone not deep in finance? What kind of things are we talking about?
Sure. Off-balance sheet benefits basically refer to financial advantages or support that don't show up directly on a company's standard financial statements, yet they significantly lower their operating costs or capital spending. So this might include things like heavily subsidized utility connections, maybe large-scale public infrastructure built specifically to support a new factory, perhaps unstated or informally agreed upon tax breaks, or even highly preferential loans from state-backed banks that just wouldn't be available under normal market conditions. These benefits significantly distort the true cost of production, making capital costs for these enterprises incredibly low. It's a profound distortion of normal market forces. In essence, many local governments effectively became the biggest entrepreneurs themselves, directly enabling and funding this massive capacity build-out.
Wow. So local governments were almost acting like venture capitalists, but maybe without the same focus on profitability.
In a way, yes. Their focus was often more on GDP, jobs, local investment metrics. And then layering onto this distorted picture, there's the ongoing issue of the national power grid's accumulated unpaid green electricity subsidies, which amount to tens of billions of RMB. That adds yet another layer of financial distortion.
Okay, so you have central incentives, local government ambition acting like entrepreneurs, unpaid subsidies. It's a complex web.
It absolutely is. And this complex, interconnected, and significantly distorted mechanism has allowed China's solar industry to, as the sources vividly put it, involute the whole world. They continuously drive down prices to levels that international competitors operating under more standard market conditions simply cannot match. So the challenge of implementing the government's current policy, trying to bring order under this unified national market initiative, raise standards, shut down non-compliant production, it's immense. With so much existing capacity and local governments so deeply reliant on these industries, the monumental question remains: how do you actually chop it off? The potential social costs, that risk of triggering a stalling economy, Shisu, that's what largely prevented decisive action back in 2023.
And this complex web of dependencies also explains why self-regulation is so difficult, right? Why can't the industry just agree to cut back?
It's that classic prisoner's dilemma again, played out on an industrial scale. Imagine the solar industry, or any other oversupplied sector, trying to collectively agree to reduce production by, say, 20–30% to stabilize prices. Sounds rational for the group, doesn't it? But any single company, especially one desperately short on cash, burdened by debt, faces an overwhelming incentive to cheat, to produce more if it sees others cutting back. Their logic is simple. If my competitors cut output, prices might edge up slightly, creating a brief window for me to grab market share and desperately needed cash. This inherent individual incentive to defect makes any voluntary self-imposed agreement incredibly fragile, almost guaranteed to collapse.
And we've seen this before, haven't we? I think the sources mentioned the Chinese color TV industry back in the 90s trying price agreements that just fell apart.
Exactly. The historical precedent is quite clear. And while, yes, some industry leaders, particularly in new energy vehicles now, are commendably trying to coordinate and push for more rational competition, the fundamental lack of a truly binding coordination mechanism means voluntary exits or collective cuts are highly unlikely to solve the core problem. Companies will keep producing even at those razor-thin margins just to keep cash flowing, service debt. It's survival mode, much like that steel industry example from 2015 operating at pennies per ton profit rather than face collapse. For many, it feels like the only choice is between a slow bleed and immediate death.
So if self-regulation is basically off the table, what are the potential pathways out? How can these critical industries break free from involution? Is there a bigger picture solution?
Well, from that systemic perspective, solving involution demands a truly systemic, holistic approach, not just piecemeal fixes. One potential pathway that came up involves harnessing external demand or capital. Could external entities, maybe sovereign wealth funds from the Middle East, major international energy firms step in and actually acquire a portion of China's immense solar production capacity, not just buy the finished panels? That kind of influx of external cash flow could fundamentally rebalance supply and demand in a way purely domestic solutions might struggle with. It could provide a vital lifeline.
And internally, what about boosting domestic demand? Opening up the grid more for solar power within China itself seems obvious.
It does, and it's critical. The challenge often cited, of course, is the intermittency. Solar power isn't constant. But solutions exist. You can leverage traditional power plants, yes, even existing coal-fired plants, to act as sophisticated regulating or peaking plants. These traditional generators can be rapidly ramped up or down to stabilize the grid, compensating for the natural fluctuations of solar or wind. This allows for much greater integration of renewables without sacrificing grid stability.
So it requires coordination across different energy sources.
Absolutely. Ultimately, these industries can't solve their deep-seated involution problems in isolation. It requires a concerted effort involving finding new external markets, attracting significant external capital, and fundamentally coordinating domestic policy adjustments like grid integration to truly rebalance that supply-demand equation and break the spiral.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit now and look at this through a more analytical lens. Our sources introduce complex systems theory and network analysis as a way to understand these competitive dynamics. How does that help us see things differently?
This is a really powerful framework, I think. It gives us a new lens. Imagine thinking of entire industries as intricate networks. Individual companies, organizations, maybe even influential people function as the nodes in this network. And their interactions, their relationships, the flow of information and resources between them, those are the edges connecting these nodes. Within this network view, the overarching goal for any company or entity is basically to compete fiercely for what we call important ecological positions, essentially, to become those pivotal nodes that capture the most value, exert the most influence, and control the most critical flows within the whole system.
Right, and the sources break down importance using 4 key measures of centrality. The first one was degree centrality. That's basically just the number of connections, right, like being popular.
Precisely. Degree centrality is the most straightforward measure. It quantifies the raw number of direct connections a node has. More connections generally means that node is more central, more accessible, and thus often more important. Think of a social media influencer with a massive following. They have high degree centrality. In business, platforms relentlessly compete to become central hubs for information, transactions, users, maximizing their degree centrality. Their power comes from being the nexus for a multitude of connections.
But those online travel agencies, the OTAs, like Trip.com, they historically made huge profits just distributing traffic, while the hotels themselves struggled. And now e-commerce giants are trying to muscle in on that.
Yeah, exactly. JD.com, Alibaba. They're leveraging their enormous existing user bases, their high-frequency interactions, to directly capture the OTA's coveted degree centrality in the travel space. Or look at that explosive short dramas industry in China. Production costs are often tiny, quality is random, but an astonishing 70–80% of the value isn't captured by the creators. It's extracted by the traffic companies and the dominant platforms like Douyin. Why? Because they control the distribution, the matching of content to audiences using algorithms and data. High degree centrality.
So it becomes a winner-take-all situation based on controlling the connections.
It does, and the inevitable consequence when everyone competes for the same critical degree centrality is that the battle spreads, as the source put it, across different domains, even seemingly unrelated sectors. This just dramatically intensifies involution even for established players. It becomes this fierce, never-ending war for attention, users, market share, forcing everyone into a lower margin, higher effort game.
Okay, the second measure was between relentless centrality. This one's more about being a bridge.
That's a great way to put it. Between miscentrality refers to a node that strategically lies on the shortest communication path between many other nodes in the network. It acts as a vital bridge or a crucial intermediary.
So these are the nodes essential for information flow between groups that might otherwise be disconnected, allowing for information arbitrage, as the source called it.
That's precisely right. They control the flow of knowledge between silos. A compelling example given was someone who can translate Chinese to Chinese, not literally, but who can explain complex things like asset management strategies to everyday clients, or conversely explain content creation to finance professionals. These intermediary roles, bridging critical information gaps, facilitating understanding, they're incredibly valuable and remarkably resistant to the starvation of involution because they create value by connecting what was previously separate.
Got it. Then number 3 was closeness centrality, the walking encyclopedia.
Yeah, basically. Closeness centrality describes a node with the shortest average distance to all other nodes in the network. They're like an information hub. They tend to hear things first and can spread information fastest. These individuals or entities are absolutely crucial for rapid, efficient information dissemination. They're positioned to receive critical news, trends, insights first, and spread it quickly, making them powerful sources of influence.
And the final one, which sounded complicated, but your explanation made sense, Eigenvector centrality. Importance comes from being connected to other important nodes.
Exactly. It's not just how many connections you have, that's degree, but who you're connected to. The quality and influence of your connections matter immensely. This measure is profoundly critical. It elegantly explains why some suppliers or entities get incredibly high valuation and influence just by being linked to a truly dominant player. The Apple supply chain, the Guolian or Apple chain is a perfect example. Being an Apple supplier instantly boosts your stock price, your revenue outlook, your status, all thanks to the prestige and volume that comes from supplying Apple.
But there's a huge catch, isn't there? Being in the Apple chain sounds great, but Apple holds all the cards.
Absolutely. Apple, as the supremely central node with immense eigenvector centrality, wields enormous power. It dictates terms. It fosters incredibly fierce competition among its suppliers. Tier 1 battling Tier 2 versus Tier 3, all fighting for Apple's business on Apple's terms.
So the suppliers might be huge, efficient, investing heavily, but the profits don't necessarily follow.
Exactly. The paradox is striking. These suppliers might have monumental production capacity, pour colossal amounts of capital into operations, but their actual shareholder returns can remain surprisingly low. Why? Because Apple captures the vast majority of the value generated across the entire chain. And this isn't just Apple. This applies to other chain masters in China, like Huawei or BYD. The lion's share of the value gets extracted at the top, leading to that pervasive phenomenon of revenue growth without profit growth. Zhengshu Zhengli for countless smaller firms in their supply chains. They're busy, they're growing revenue, but the actual profit for shareholders is painfully elusive.
Which brings us back to that fundamental question. If profits are so thin, competition's so brutal, why do these companies persist? Why stay in such an involuted game?
It's a critical point because for many Chinese private enterprises, the main driver isn't solely, or maybe even primarily, about maximizing consistent shareholder returns in the way a Western investor might expect. Those returns, as we've seen, can be volatile and low. There are other, often less visible but very powerful benefits at play. For instance, large private shareholders, the founders or major owners, often benefit hugely from the sheer growth of the enterprise scale, revenue, market presence, even if public shareholders aren't seeing big, consistent profits. Plus, these companies play a crucial role locally. They resolve local employment issues, which earns them valuable subsidies, preferential loans, favorable policies from local governments desperate to maintain social stability and economic activity.
And then there was that mention of rent-seeking or palmody leakage. How does that fit in?
Right. Rent-seeking, or Paomodi Liu, here describes how individuals or groups within the company, usually those with power, can extract extra benefits or leakage during the investment, procurement, and production phases. Think about a big company getting a huge loan, maybe government-backed, to build a new factory. Even if that factory eventually operates on razor-thin, involuted margins, the sheer volume of money flowing through the project during construction and setup creates opportunities. Benefits can flow to specific individuals or connected entities through things like inflated costs for materials, awarding subcontracts to friends at high rates, or other preferential deals that siphon off funds.
Right.
These benefits might not show up as official profit on the books, but they create incredibly strong incentives for key decision makers to keep the company running, growing, investing, even if the reported profitability for outside shareholders stays stubbornly low.
That paints a really vivid picture of the complex incentives. So for an investor looking at Chinese manufacturing, it means understanding that companies might prioritize survival, local stability, growth, and these other benefits over the kind of consistent shareholder value Western investors usually look for.
It absolutely does. It fundamentally changes the investment calculus. You can't just rely on standard profitability metrics. You have to understand this broader context of incentives and priorities. It makes traditional investment analysis uniquely challenging.
Okay, so wrapping our heads around all of this, what does it mean for us, the listeners? As we navigate careers, investments, just try to thrive. The sources seem to converge on a pretty powerful investment philosophy. Avoid involution, embrace outward evolution, heavily invest in non-involution. Let's break that down.
Right. First, avoid involution. The reasoning is stark and simple. Involution, by its very nature, destroys value. It's a negative-sum game in the long run. Even if you think you have superior information about a company or an industry caught in this cycle, it remains an incredibly perilous landscape. Why? Because the fundamental rules of the game are broken or constantly shifting. Struggling, desperate companies can disrupt the market in totally unpredictable ways, dragging even the strongest players down with them. The traditional laws of supply and demand, of rational competition, they either cease to apply or you perceive them incorrectly. It almost guarantees significant losses if you try to play by the old rules.
Yeah.
You think you understand the game, but the game itself has turned into this chaotic death match.
Okay, avoid the black hole. Then second pillar, embrace outward evolution. This is about looking beyond the current battlefield.
Exactly. It's all about expanding your horizons, actively seeking new markets, pursuing new sources of traffic or demand. It means deliberately looking for growth opportunities that lie outside the saturated, intensely competitive domestic market where involution is rampant.
So like cross-border e-commerce. Selling into economies with different dynamics may be inflation.
That's a key example. Leveraging cross-border e-commerce into economies currently experiencing inflation. The US, Europe, parts of Southeast Asia can create powerful arbitrage opportunities. Stark price differences, supply-demand imbalances between regions. These can be exploited. But, and this is crucial, this path demands a high degree of analytical skill.
Yep.
You need a sophisticated understanding of global market dynamics, a really robust grasp of game theory. The competition might be different, but it's still highly strategic. You're dealing with higher uncertainties, new cultural landscapes. It's not just about finding new customers for the same product. It might mean adapting products, building completely new international sales networks, maybe even acquiring foreign companies to get local knowledge. It's a much bigger strategic shift.
Right, it's not easy, but it's focused on growth, not just survival.
Yep.
Okay, and the third pillar, heavily invest in non-involution. This sounds like finding the quiet corners. The business is not in the fight.
That's precisely the essence. These are businesses characterized by predictable, often recurring, low-risk cash flows. They're what some people call lying flat or tanging businesses, the ones that seem to win passively without needing to engage in that intense value-destroying competition. They typically offer medium, stable returns, but with significantly less drama, less volatility, less existential threat. This connects directly to that idea of a free cash flow strategy, emphasizing robust cash generation and stability, which provides an invaluable anchor in turbulent times. Think about businesses providing essential recurring services with high switching costs, maybe a specialized industrial maintenance firm or a niche B2B software provider for a very specific stable sector. They aren't the flashy unicorns, but they often generate predictable, strong free cash flows because they operate outside the pain championship of involuted industries. They've carved out a durable niche.
This whole philosophy then seems to translate into a really powerful personal strategy too. Don't just lie flat, evolve outward. It challenges that common idea that the only alternative to burning out in the rat race is just giving up, right?
It's an absolutely crucial distinction. The true opposite of destructive involution isn't passivity. It's not just hang-ping. It's active outward evolution, deliberately seeking out and proactively cultivating new, thriving growth systems for yourself. This demands doing something fundamentally different from the crowd. Look at the supply side of your personal value. It's often significantly less crowded than the demand side, where everyone is chasing the same perceived high-demand careers or industries, inadvertently jumping into the same involuted pool.
So the idea is actively search for those uncrowded paths, where competition is less fierce, where your unique skills can actually make a difference. Resist the urge to just follow the herd into those hyper-competitive civil service exams or prestigious banking jobs if they're already zero-sum games.
Precisely. It's an urgent call for genuine self-discovery. What are your truly unique skills? What are you deeply passionate about? What can you do differently from others? What specific value can you offer that sets you apart? The goal is to consciously build your own distinct contribution. Carve out a niche where your efforts aren't immediately diluted or rendered meaningless by hyper-competition. Build your own lighthouse in that sea of sameness.
That feels like a huge mental shift compared to maybe previous generations. You call it the choice over effort era.
Yeah, I think that captures it well. In eras of rampant, pervasive economic growth, effort really was king. You could reliably just work harder, run faster on the treadmill, and generally get ahead. The link between effort and reward was strong, predictable. But now, in this new landscape, choice is unequivocally more important than effort. And to make those good, impactful choices, you absolutely need multiple perspectives. You cannot afford to remain stuck viewing the world through a single, narrow lens. You have to consciously break free from mental models that just don't work anymore.
And part of that toolkit is this bionic adaptive strategy you mentioned. It had two fascinating parts, cross recombination and respecting randomness.
Right. Cross-recombination is about creatively taking successful experiences, methods, insights from one domain and intelligently combining them with another, seemingly unrelated one. It's like that Chinese to Chinese translation idea, applying communication skills from a corporate setting to maybe an entrepreneurial one. Most genuine innovation actually doesn't come from thin air. It comes from this kind of clever cross-domain recombination, connecting existing dots in new ways.
Okay, connecting the dots.
Yeah.
And then respecting randomness. That sounds counterintuitive. Learning from failures.
It is, and it's a profound shift. Sometimes what looks like a random setback, a negative outcome, even an outright failure, is actually revealing new dimensions or hidden opportunities that were totally invisible within your old framework. What seems like chaos in one dimension might actually reveal a pattern in another if you look closely. It reflects that deep coexistence of randomness and order in complex systems. It's about being incredibly observant, analytical, and adaptable enough to pivot when your current strategy clearly fails. Think of how many scientific discoveries came from accidents, from experiments going wrong. It's seeing failure not as an endpoint, but as invaluable data, hard-won data.
And you argue that now, counterintuitively, might actually be a good time for this kind of exploration.
I think so, yes. The cost of exploration is arguably lower now than it has been. If you're thinking of starting something new, pivoting your career in 2024 versus, say, 2021, the opportunity costs are often lower. Traditional jobs might be less secure or lucrative. Operational costs for new ventures talent, office space are also frequently more affordable. And critically, especially in places like China, there's a relatively robust social safety net. As the saying goes, you won't starve to death. That significantly lowers the real and perceived risk of trying something unconventional. It creates a surprisingly fertile ground for experimentation.
So if you pursue something genuinely different, meaningful to you, the effort feels different. It becomes willing effort.
Exactly. You're pouring energy into it because you intrinsically know you're making a difference, creating value in a way that resonates with your purpose, not just grinding away in a pointless race. And this ties into consciously challenging path dependency, breaking free from that good child syndrome. Societal norms often push us towards conformity, towards competition on narrow, predefined paths. Parental guidance emphasizing getting the degree, the stable job.
But the paradox of involution means that competing fiercely on those narrow paths and just giving up and lying flat can both lead to similar unsatisfying outcomes, because effort stops correlating with reward.
Precisely. Both those who compete fiercely and those who lie flat are often stuck in the same dimension of understanding. And in an involuted system, effort gets randomized. It doesn't reliably lead to proportional reward. When that happens, people get discouraged, feel lost. That search for emotional satisfaction through consumption or relying solely on others, it often indicates people haven't found new dimensions of value or purpose.
So the only way out is to jump out. Find a new perspective, a new dimension where your efforts actually matter.
That seems to be the core message. Find a space where your unique efforts are recognized and lead to positive outcomes. This not only builds positive emotions and a more fulfilling life for you, but you might even become a producer of emotional value for others by showing a different way is possible. And this absolutely requires innovation and creativity. A truly loose atmosphere, free from excessive pressure, rigid rules, constant competition, is crucial for creativity. Strict, rigid, involuted systems stifle it. Engaging in pure involution, that single-dimensional competition within fixed rules, just cutting costs without expanding value, is fundamentally the wrong answer. It's a self-defeating loop leading only to collective exhaustion.
What an incredible journey today. Really, from understanding the destructive mechanics of involution in China's industries, to seeing the government's huge challenge in tackling it, and finally, uncovering this personal strategy for all of us to forge our own path. The big takeaway feels like it's not about stopping effort, but intelligently redirecting it into meaningful, non-involuted pathways that actually create value and fulfillment.
Indeed. In a world where competition often feels less like a fair contest and more like a grueling pain championship, where the winner is just the one who can suffer the most, endure the lowest margins, perhaps the ultimate liberation, the true source of happiness and unique value, is found in the courage to discover or maybe even actively design a new game. A game where you define the rules, rather than endlessly suffering in a game designed by others where the odds might be fundamentally stacked against you.
So we really encourage you, our listener, to reflect on your own involution machines, maybe in your career, your investments, even your daily habits. Consider how you might apply these strategies we've discussed today. To choose consciously, seek multiple perspectives, embrace adaptive variation, Perhaps then you can start building your own anti-involution flywheel, propelling yourself towards a future of genuine growth and meaningful impact. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Thank you.